Good morning, A pushers. So, welcome back to school. Hopefully, you got your Tiger King fix over the weekend. Oh, what a strange bunch of people. Oh, my. So, today, this is just an overview, a contextual slideshow for you as you get ready to do your actual assignment today. You do not need to take notes on this. I repeat, you do not need to take notes on this. You do just need to watch it, pay attention, because it gives you information that I think will be useful before you do your assignment today. So, if you remember, before spring break, when last we left our story, we were talking about the Cold War, mostly abroad in Europe, and then eventually we go to Asia to fight the communists. And we have the Truman Doctrine, and we're very worried about the spread of communism throughout the world. As we get into the later 1940s and into the 1950s, we get very concerned about the spread of communism here in the United States. And so here are some just posters and stuff from that time period. You can see here the Red Menace is real. That's what they called communism back then. It was a slang term, Reds, because their uniforms and their flags and their colors were all red. So the Red Menace is real, and there's a spooky looking guy who happens to be red. Report all suspected communist activity. Ooh, scary. And this was a movie that was released in the late 40s, early 50s called The Red Menace. And it was about communists infiltrating and taking over the United States. And it was apparently the most talked about drama of our time. I kind of doubt that, but maybe, if that's what they want to say, whatever. It was so shocking that it was filmed behind locked studio doors. Yeah, I'm sure it was. And then you see here's Captain America, right? Captain America, commie smasher. And everybody's cheering as he's dragging this communist out of a building. It looks like maybe a battleship. You can see some guns back there. There's Captain America. He's cheering. Yes, he saved America from the communist infiltrators. And here's, I don't know who that is, very bizarre guy who needs a lot of help dressing, cheering on Captain America. So this is just, again, you don't need to take notes. This should be fairly quick. I'm going to go through this stuff fairly quickly, just so you have some background, some contextual knowledge as you do your assignment for today. So as we go into the late 1940s, 1947, 1948, 49, there's a real concern, a real fear that communism is beginning to spread throughout the United States. And the fear is so great that there's a committee set up in the House of Representatives whose only job was to go out and investigate possible communist activity and root out communists in American society and ensure that Americans are, quote unquote, being loyal. And so this House committee in the House of Representatives was called HUAC, House on Un-American Affairs Committee. And it was, again, their job to go out and find people who were being disloyal to the United States and find evidence of communists infiltrating American society. One of the first targets of HUAC was Hollywood. Hollywood had made a number of pro-Soviet films during World War II, The Boy Who Saved Moscow and The Red Army Marches On, and movies kind of like that. And so that was fine during World War II because they were our allies. After World War II, people began to look at these movies and go, holy cow, it's pretty obvious. Hollywood's full of communists and communist sympathizers, and Hollywood has a great deal of influence on American society at that time. People are still going to the movies once a week to go see a movie, and there was fear that if Hollywood is overrun with communists, they'll begin to brainwashing Americans into becoming communists. And so HUAC begins to subpoena a number of people in Hollywood for suspected communist and communist ties and so on and so forth. And these were writers, and these are producers, and these are directors, and these are cameramen, and these are lighting engineers, and these are obviously actors as well. Now, there were some people in Hollywood who have become known as the Hollywood 10, and you can see some of them here in the photograph. These are people that just refused to testify before HUAC, and their argument was it's fine to be a communist, that nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have the right to believe whatever you want to believe, except this. And so their argument was that the hearings and the investigations were all unconstitutional. Now, these Hollywood 10 are fairly well-known, fairly powerful movie stars who had the ability to stand up to this. Now, if you're just a lowly writer and nobody knows who you are, there's a lot of pressure on you to testify because you may not get a job. And in fact, that's what happens. Hollywood studios are very worried about it getting out that they were employing communist or suspected communist writers, directors, producers, and so on and so forth. So Hollywood movie studios began to create a blacklist, and it's literally a list with people's names on it who are suspected of or who are known to be communist or communist sympathizers. And this list was circulated throughout the movie studios. If your name was on this list, you couldn't get a job. You just didn't get a job. And as a result, about 500 people who worked in film had their careers ruined. And Hollywood begins to make movies kind of reflecting this fear of communism. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was a science fiction movie about aliens who come from another planet and clone themselves to look like you and slowly begin to take over planet Earth through this process. The movie was about science fiction, aliens coming from outer space, that kind of stuff. But the real point of the movie was this kind of irrational fear of communism, that they were coming from everywhere and they're invading us. Another movie is The Blob. That was about this fear of communism, this very slow-moving entity that kind of rolls through cities and towns and devouring and destroying everything in its wake. Again, a reflection of the fears that America had of communism and communists infiltrating American society at that time. About 1949, there comes some real spy cases in American society. HUAC has a guy come forward. His name is Whittaker Chambers, who is an admitted former communist spy. He is no longer a communist spy, but he admits that he was a communist spy during the 1920s, 1930s. And now he's reformed, and he's helping HUAC find communist and communist spies in American society. And Whittaker Chambers testifies that this guy here, Alger Hiss, who was a very powerful, very well-known man in America at that time, was a communist spy. Alger Hiss was a fairly high-ranking government official during the New Deal. In the Roosevelt administration, he was involved in some New Deal administration or New Deal programs during the Great Depression. And then he went on to become the editor of Time magazine, which was by far the largest and most influential news magazine. And so Whittaker Chambers says Alger Hiss could still be a communist spy, and he's in charge of the most powerful, most influential news magazine in the country, Time magazine. So he's deciding what people are going to read and what people are going to see in the information that's going to be put out to people. So Whittaker Chambers makes this accusation against Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss angrily denies it. Whittaker Chambers says that he was. Alger Hiss says that he wasn't. So it becomes a kind of he said kind of thing. Out of this whole spy drama in HUAC comes a very, very, who will become a very, very, very powerful, very well-known American politician who takes a special interest in this. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is a member of HUAC at this time. He's elected into the United States House of Representatives in 1946. Richard Nixon is very concerned about communist influence and communist spy in American society. He thinks Whittaker Chambers is telling the truth, and you can see there that Richard Nixon thinks Alger Hiss is lying. Long story short, they never really get to the bottom of it until 1992, when the Soviet Union collapses and all of the spy files that the Soviet Union had from the Cold War become openly accessible. And the United States gets a hold of these spy files, and we begin to find out who was and who was not a spy. And we find out, as a result of this, that Alger Hiss was a spy. Alger Hiss was truly a spy for the Soviet Union. So this is the first spot where Richard Nixon becomes a national prominent figure, and he won't leave the spotlight in American politics for the next 30, 40 years or so. And Richard Nixon makes his name from this as being the preeminent anti-communist crusader in the country. 1949, something very shocking happens. The Soviet Union explodes their first atomic bomb. We knew that the Soviet Union was working on this, but everything that we knew about where they were in this process told us that the Soviet Union would not be able to successfully detonate an atomic bomb until 1954, 1955. And now, 5 years ahead of schedule, in 1949, Soviet Union detonates its first atomic bomb. So immediately, it's pretty clear. This is the result of a spy case. And the United States and England, the only two countries that had the secrets to the atomic bomb at that time, begin this very massive, very in-depth search for the spies. And these two people, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, are accused of spying and accused of passing along the Soviet secrets or the nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Julius Rosenberg worked in the U.S. State Department. Julius Rosenberg had top secret clearance. Julius Rosenberg had access to the nuclear secrets, the nuclear recipe, I guess you could say. And both he and his wife were active members in the American Communist Party. So they were accused of being the spies who passed along the secrets. They angrily denied it. They argued that the only reason that they were being persecuted was because they were Jewish. They're found guilty, and in 1953, both of them are executed for espionage. So now we're terrified because now the Soviet Union is on the same footing as the United States in terms that they have a nuclear bomb as well. That's no longer a weapon that only we have and we can use as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the Soviet Union. 1952 is an election year. And Eisenhower is elected president. He's the first Republican to be elected president since 1928. Oof, that's a long time. Eisenhower was the Supreme Allied Commanding General in World War II. He is a huge national hero. He's a war hero. Americans love electing war heroes. And he becomes president in 1952 as his vice. This is the fear, right? When he comes into office, that this is America under communism and the flames, and you can see the communists killing, somebody here, the communists choking people out, and it's just chaos and things are going up in flames. This is tomorrow, America under communism. So there's this very irrational fear of communism in the United States at this time. And this wondering that if your neighbor, if your friend, if a family member was a communist, there was a real fear in America that communists were everywhere and they were here to overthrow the country. Now, Eisenhower chooses as his vice president Richard Nixon, who is the most well-known anti-communist crusader in the country. The Republicans choose Richard Nixon precisely because of that. The Republicans wanted to be seen as the preeminent anti-communist party. Coming out of all of this is a little-known Republican senator from Wisconsin who is pretty much a failure at life. He's a failure in Senate. He's a failure at everything. The only thing that he is successful at is drinking. And this Republican senator from Wisconsin is in real trouble of not being reelected. And so he latches on to this fear of communists being everywhere as his vehicle to being reelected into the Senate. His name is Joseph McCarthy. And what Joseph McCarthy is going to do is he's going to create a monster that will consume and destroy the lives of Americans across the United States. Capitalizing on this fear of communism and communist everywhere. Joseph McCarthy, for a short period of time, in creating this monster, will become the single most powerful senator in the United States. So here's what happens out of McCarthyism. McCarthyism is the term that's used for the tactics that take place here. It's the politically motivated practice of making accusations of disloyalty, subversion, or treason without proper regard for evidence. Basically, you're guilty by accusation. That's McCarthyism, and that's what he does. McCarthy launches investigations all across the country, investigating housewives and businessmen and school teachers and scientists and fellow politicians, accusing them of being communists. And it's all he needed was the accusation, and your life was over. Your life as you knew it was over. If you had a job, you would lose your job because employers don't want a communist working for them, because the perception was if you have a communist working for you, then you must be a communist. You would lose your friends because friends of communists are communists themselves. You would lose contact with a lot of family members because if there's a communist in the family, that means that the entire family was communist. That was the perception. So just the accusation that you were a communist was damaging, and in many cases, life-ending. Now, nobody went to prison for this, but they certainly had their lives completely, utterly, and totally destroyed simply by being accused of being a communist. Joseph McCarthy was a bully. He would yell and scream and intimidate his witnesses into admitting that they were communist or admitting that they knew of other communists. So just to kind of finish up there's a little post from Joseph McCarthy. Who knew Twitter was around in the 1950s? Crazy. Unbelievable. I thought Twitter was pretty new. So if you don't follow me, you're a commie. And that was what Joseph McCarthy would tell you. So today, what we're going to do is you guys are going to have an assignment that goes through several different documents dealing with McCarthyism and dealing with this fear of communism. And you are going to have to determine if what Joseph McCarthy did, or not necessarily what Joseph McCarthy did, if the fear of communism in the United States was justified. Certainly the tactics that Joseph McCarthy used were not justified. Certainly what Joseph McCarthy does is not justified. Certainly the fears that he fed off of were not justified. But was there a justification in the United States to be worried or be concerned about communism? So that's your assignment today, is to read the documents and make a determination. Was there a real reason to be concerned about communism in the 1950s in the United States? Oh, just to follow up really quick, Joseph McCarthy ends up being exposed on live TV as being a fraud and a bully and fabricating evidence and just being an all-around bad dude. when he decides to go after the United States military, charging that the United States military was full of communists, which was absolutely ludicrous and didn't make any sense. And it becomes the first big TV event in the 1950s. And on live TV, he's exposed as a fraud and a bully, and eventually cost him his job. He eventually gets voted out of office as a result of that. So that's just a wrap up. Again, you did not need to take notes on this. You just needed to kind of pay attention, follow along with it, use some of the information out of here. There is an extra credit question that's in here that is on the assignment. If you watch this, you will get that extra credit question. Hope everything is going well. If you have any questions, problems, concerns, conundrums, please feel free to get in touch with me today or some other time, and I will help you as much as I can. Thanks.